I mean, come on, you guys knew this was coming, right?
Hello, my fellow monks, and welcome back to another episode of Swingin' Reviews, the show where I take a random album off the shelf and I tell you how I feel about it. The very day I'm recording this is July 4th, otherwise known as Independence Day here in North America. And when I think of American bands, there aren't many more fitting, more kick-ass than Van Halen. Coming to prominence in the late 70s, blazing the trail for heavy metal and hard rock through the 80s, and surviving the 90s. The amount of classic albums this band has under its belt, in particular the David Lee Roth era, is just mind-blowing. For today's episode, we're going to zoom in on the 1978 debut record, simply titled Van Halen.
Yes, this is in fact Van Halen's debut record. I mean, what a way to kick the door down, am I right?
Before we get into why this album is such a classic record, we must first take a trip back to the late 70s to get the full picture. The year is 1977. Van Halen, consisting of David Lee Roth on vocals, Alex Van Halen on drums, Michael Anthony on that smooth bass, and a certain guitarist some of you may know, Eddie Van Halen. After getting denied time and time again by multiple record labels, which is crazy to me, especially in hindsight, seeing the heights this band would rise to in just a couple years. Thankfully, in time, the guys were able to score a deal with Warner Records. With Ted Templeman as producer, the guys got to work on their debut record.
Now with the intro out of the way, it's time for Van Halen!
This album fucking wrecks. There's just no two ways around it. This one record shifted the direction of heavy music in the entire 80s, and I do mean the entire decade. I wouldn't classify Van Halen as a hair metal band, but their influence on that particular subgenre can't be ignored. Before I get too excited and start throwing my own feces, let's take a peek at the front. You know what that means. It's time for Cover Art Theater! Wow, talk about iconic. If I was a record buyer in 1978 and saw this on the rack, instant purchase. Dave's coming out at you right on the microphone stand like a hoverboard. Alex is cloaked in this mysterious fog. Michael Anthony's just slamming down that bass like some kind of funky Hulk. And the legend himself, EVH, is looking calm, but also looks to be belting out a scream that'll make the guitar bow to his every whim. Mwah! It's beautiful and badass all at the same time. I think that's enough gushing on the cover art. It's time to get swinging into the music. When the topic of iconic album openers comes up, you'll often hear people say, Taxman, Baba O'Reilly, Welcome to the Jungle. But right at the top of that list is Running with the Devil. The sound of car horns being multi-tracked comes in. Then Michael Anthony's iconic bass line enters the chat. Once the main riff kicks in, everything just comes together and you're sold immediately. David Lee Roth comes in with that down and dirty swagger, singing about living the hard life in the dirty streets. I always envision those scenes in 80s movies where it's cold and rainy and there's always a revenge plot. Eddie's guitar melody after the chorus is just delicious. Anyway, long story short, killer song, great introduction. Their cover of The Kinks' You Really Got Me is incredible and tops the original by leaps and bounds. Michael Anthony's bass, oh my god. One thing that's consistent throughout the entire Van Halen discography are those signature vocal harmonies between Dave and Mike, a crucial part of the VH sound, no doubt. Eddie just rips the solo a new one here. Ain't Talking About Love is similar to Running with the Devil in terms of lyrics detailing the hard life, only this time it seems as if Dave is talking to a woman he knows or maybe had an off and on relationship with. Another riff that's iconic and is so fun to headbang to. I'm the One continues the frantic assault from the last few tracks, I love Dave's banshee screams in the pre-chorus. Another absolutely face-melting solo follows, and Mike is all over the fretboard. And then just when you think the track's about to finish, the band stops completely and breaks into what I can only describe as a cracked-out barbershop quartet. Jamie's Crying, the third single released for the album, has a sense of control and bounce to it. This and another track we'll get to later are outliers on the album, and add some versatility to the record, fleshing everything out nicely. And speaking of flesh, one listen to this next song, and all that will remain are the bones that haven't been melted away by this atomic track. That's right, Atomic Punk is my absolute favorite song on the record. It's metal, mixed with punk, and David just screaming all over the place, nearly clipping the audio, but in the best way possible. This was 5 years after Aladdin Sane, but I always picture a figure like that when the song comes on. It just seems fitting. Feel Your Love Tonight harkens back to the early 60s, but in a way only Van Halen can. But in terms of the more melodic cuts on here, the best has to be the dreamy Little Dreamer. Dave's vocals are unusually soothing, adding to the atmosphere. The way Eddie bends the strings in between the verses and changes after each verse is a brilliant touch. We get another tonal shift with Ice Cream Man, another cover, this time from Chicago blues artist John Bryan. Upon your first listen, you're led to believe the whole song will play out as a folky blues jam, until the rest of the band joins in and the song becomes an explosive rockabilly number. And in another brilliant Van Halen move, we have David Lee Roth adding a more sexually charged fury and innuendo to the lyrics. I honestly couldn't have picked a better closer for this album if I tried. On Fire is the perfect way to end this roller coaster of an album. The most overtly metal song on the album, you can hear some new wave of British heavy metal influences in here. Vocals that soar so high and shrill, they make Rob Halford jealous. Once the final notes are played and the song fades, you are left in awe of what you have heard. This album has the same effect on me even after multiple listens. Now the album may be over, but we're not done yet. Arguably, I saved the best for last. You may have noticed I skimmed over Eruption earlier, mainly because I feel this instrumental in particular needed its own spotlight. Just under 2 minutes of Eddie Van Halen, the guy who helped bring guitar tapping to the forefront of everyone's mind. And when I mentioned that most of the players going into the 80s and beyond tried to emulate EVH, this song was arguably the origin of that. And Eruption is the perfect title, starting slow at first, building and gaining momentum for a solid minute and a half. The only word I can use to describe it is mind-melting. It's a groundbreaking song and an even more groundbreaking record. This would secure Van Halen's spot as rock legends, and more importantly, shine an even brighter spotlight on the talents of the late great Edward Van Halen. Phew! Van Halen 1 is done and in the books. I appreciate every single one of you who stuck around until the very end. If you enjoyed the review, please slam that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more swinging content and to become a part of our musical monk family. Lastly, listen to Rush. And for all my fellow monks out there, keep meditating with vinyl.